felt like I'd failed. So that was pretty brutal time in my life. I didn't respond well to that. There is a day every week where I look at myself and I go, should I really be doing this? Like, do I really know what I'm doing? Maybe I should just stop. You don't realize how long it takes to get to that true success. You think it's going to happen a lot quicker. And what happens when you do a startup is you get a lot of really early success. It's a bit like going to the gym, right? And then it plateaus out. And if you just keep going, you do go through these other jumps and plateau. And I think where founders really struggle is when they hit plateaus. We are a content-driven industry. We don't really do sales in the traditional sense. We don't do business development and marketing. And I learned a lot of techniques from a lot of people that I know on how to start doing content really simply, without it taking up too much time. And then as it begins to have effect, how to build on that. And what we found is that it's a much more sustainable way of growing. It doesn't cost anything. And I joined at a time of just prior to it exploding here in Australia. It's your business, whatever the outcomes are, you're the one that's going to benefit or not benefit. So you need to be across it all, but you need other people to execute it. And I've had some of our clients ask me to come and visit VCs with them so that there's a man with them, which is just terrifying that they actually have to think like that. Everybody goes through that. I still go through that. My staff remind me this advice, which is part of the reason I'm going to share it to you, because I think all founders naturally just want to have that continuous curve, and it's just not maintainable. But by doing these physical challenges, they help me believe that I can overcome the mental challenges. So I think that's probably success for me.
Just before we get started, if you're enjoying the podcast, can you please make sure you subscribe or follow my channel? This helps me out tremendously. Steve, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. Pleasure.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And you have a lot of experience in the startup space, in recruitment, obviously, and other areas. And we're going to chat all about that today. But to get started, can you share how you initially ventured into the startup space, and were there any formative experiences in your early life that fueled this passion that you have?
Good question. And 100% that there are. So I'm not sure that drove me to startups, but it definitely drove me to running businesses. I'll start with the formative things, because let's go way back. So I think a lot of the reasons why I have gone out and started businesses and felt quite comfortable starting businesses, which ultimately is what led me to the startup space, is my father was a Harley Street dentist. So for anyone who doesn't know the dentist world in the UK, that's like the epitome of dentistry. It's the street in London, and all the best dentists are there. And his father was a Harley Street dentist, and his father was a Harley Street dentist. So we came from that background, and it's a very beautiful street and incredibly expensive dentistry. I'm not sure that's any better, but it's incredibly expensive. And he had 3 children, including myself, all living in Surrey and all at private schools. And he found out that he had a solid neck bone as opposed to a segmented neck bone. So normally the neck bone has sort of a number of little bones. His was just one solid bone.
Wow.
And he found that out because he had some pain and went and got it checked out. And they said, if you carry on practicing dentistry, you will be in a wheelchair by the time you're 40. Problem. Because studied nothing else, dentistry is quite unique. He didn't really know what to do. So with that, facing that, and obviously costs of running a practice, all this kind of stuff, he went out and did a whole bunch of entrepreneurial things. Now, I was pretty young, but I was young enough to not really understand what's going on, but old enough to remember it. And my father is an academic. He's got 4 degrees. He's not a particularly out there kind of person. He's very quite conservative. But he went out and he was to make ends meet, he went out and he did a number of things. He went and wrote about 4 or 5 books on computer programming when computer programming was just starting. He went out and started importing rap music to the UK, which is one of the most ridiculous things you could ever imagine for a man like this. Had a company called Movin' Music, and he doesn't really like rap music, but he saw the gap and started importing rap music and CDs. I remember that. He went and started a business on dentistry education. I started doing lectures. And then he ended up becoming editor of the British Dental Journal. But I think he was a financial planner in there for some time as well. But what I saw someone who said, right, I've got a problem. I've got costs. I've got quite expensive costs. I've got no career. what do I go and do? And he just went and tried things, and made most of them work to a fairly good degree. So I think that, without question, had an impact on me. I would have been about 12 at that age, sort of going through to when I finished school. So unbelievable.
Do you think that he was happier in his later entrepreneurial careers than dentistry? Because I can imagine like pulling teeth can't be that much fun.
I've never asked him that question. None of us have gone into dentistry. My brother went into IT. My sister was a lawyer, and obviously I've done a variety of things. But although my daughter doesn't want to go into medicine, so maybe there's a gene in there somewhere. But I actually do not know. I think it was very stressful. 3 children, mortgage, school fees, all that kind of stuff, which he managed to keep going together. But I don't know. It's a good question. He loved his last role, editor of the British Dental Journal. Like, he loved that role. He retired from that role. They gave him all of I think he did it in the end for about 15 years. And they gave him every copy of the British Dental Journal bound up in these amazing leather things, which he's got at home. So, yeah, it's good. You know what? I'm going to ask him. I will ask him that question, and I will have to get back to you on that.
Okay.
But there's no question that gave me had an impression on me that probably took me down a more non-traditional route from a career perspective. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting. And so you're really the one that's followed in the entrepreneurial area, whereas your brother and sister more traditional.
Yeah, I'm much more like my mother. My mother is, so my father's he doesn't really like sport. Like I said, he's very academic. My mother was quite the opposite. She was the rogue at school. She was expelled. She was outside the classroom the whole time. She was captain of the sports team. She's very much a people person. And so obviously we're a combination of the two. My sister and brother are both very academic. My sister was like top in law school in the whole country, all these kinds of different things. So lots of differences happening there in terms of how we grew up. But I think probably the biggest difference is, for me, I really struggle with, what's the right way of putting it? I really struggle with being told what to do. So I found the corporate career very, very difficult. You know, I went into finance, did not enjoy finance. That led me to recruitment, because I went into a recruitment company and they said, do you want to work here? Which is how most people end up in recruitment, which ultimately led me to Australia, which ultimately led me to starting my first company. And then, you know, after selling my second business, I noticed that no one was doing recruitment well for startups, including myself in my previous company. And that's where I came up with the idea of moving into startups. And that was 5-6 years ago. And I had dealt with startups before, and we did some early recruitment for safety culture and people like that when they were like 5-6 people. But I hadn't really been embedded into the ecosystem until maybe 5-6 years ago. And I joined at a time of just prior to it exploding here in Australia.
Yeah, probably good timing. It's interesting, you know, that you say you don't like to be told what to do. That probably means that you're a good founder, or CEO, but not so much a good employee. And that reminds me, I was interviewing one of the founders of Twitter, Rabble, and he was saying, I don't know if I'm an entrepreneur because I'm really good at new ideas and creating, etc., or because I'm just a really bad employee. And I know in my case, I'm a really bad employee.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm not a great employee. I'll tell you a story from my days of working at Michael Page. So just prior to moving to Australia, I was working in London, and I'd gone into the city of London where I was doing investment banking, IT recruitment. Very structured. Michael Page, very, very structured global recruitment company. And as all companies were doing right then, CRMs were becoming super important. It was kind of that's how old I am. It was becoming the beginning of CRMs. And you had to do everything in your CRM, which I didn't, because they told me to do it and they told me I had to, which instantly meant I didn't want to do it. And I remember that the way you got paid your commission in Michael Page, I think it's still the same way now, is it's a discretionary bonus, right? So whereas a lot of recruiters just pay you based on your revenue, Michael Page were trying to create a more holistic way of rewarding other behaviors other than just purely sales to create better recruiters. And I remember sitting down with my director, a guy called Drew, and he said, so, gone through your stats, he goes, according to the system, you've sent 3 emails and you have made 4 or 5 phone calls in the last 6 months. And I sat there and I said, I said, well, he goes, but before you go and say anything, he goes, you're also the second top performer, not the top, but the second top. I remember that very well. The second top performer in the business. He goes, seems to be a bit of a misalignment here. And I was like, yeah, well, not really. I've just been doing the job, yada, 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 yada. Talk like you do as a young man. Anyway, he gave me the worst discretionary bonus ever to try and teach me a lesson. What did I do? I didn't learn that lesson. I left and I moved to Australia. So that's kind of what actually made me go, that's it. I'm out of here. I can't stand this company. And I came over to Australia. So, yeah, I'm a really bad employee. Would nail it.
I think, like many of us, that's maybe why we're entrepreneurs. Part of the reason.
Maybe.
Yeah. I'm always interested in why people get in. Like, are you sort of an accidental startup founder, entrepreneur as well? You came to Australia, and so how did everything start, like with the nudge and everything else? How did that all get started? What happened there?
Yeah, I mean, I was always wanting to start my own recruitment business. There was no question. I had to wait until, obviously, I came over on a 457 visa. I was working in a company called Candle, which is now called Clarius. I really enjoyed working there. I wanted to start my own business, but knew I had 0 experience. So I moved to Hayes, another big recruiter, very much like Michael Page, which I didn't enjoy because, again, it's so structured. But I went there to get management training because they had a legendary training program around management and still do. And as soon as I went through that training and I learned a lot, but as soon as I got my permanent residency, I started my first business with another gentleman. And we sold that business a few years later, which I wish we hadn't done, and we can come back to that if you like. I then had a bit of time off, as you do, and then I bought into a friend's business. I bought 50% of that, and we grew that astronomically. I then sold back out of that business. So I bought into his business, then he bought me out. And then I had probably 6 months off, swearing I wasn't going to do another recruitment company, and then started Nudge. But I always had in my head all these recruitment companies that people start, everyone's like, we're different, but no one really is. And so for me, it was super important, not that we were different, that we took it from a completely different angle. And Nudge is the most diverse company, I think, from a recruitment perspective, you'll see. Also, obviously, very niche. And we really push to do things differently. I wouldn't say we're different because ultimately recruitment is always the same. But I think our offerings are different. Ultimately, what we do in the back is still the same, and you can't ever really change that. But I think we created products, and we've got so many products now that are designed to be different. So that's probably been the most enjoyable journey for me. Nudge has been the most enjoyable thing. So many things I've learned, so many things I've done differently than all my other companies.
It's interesting. So you sold your first business and you sort of regretted that. Like, tell us about that business, what happened there, and why you regret that.
Look, I regret it because I think it was a really good business. I sold it because I was young. I was bedazzled that a listed company wanted to buy us. The timing was terrible. I'll touch on that in a minute. But it was called Fingerprint. It was one of the first agencies to focus on the digital era. So when digital became a thing, I'm not quite sure what the demographic of your audience is, but some people will remember that. Some people have no idea what I'm talking about. And we started doing digital recruitment. It was Fingerprint Consulting, and it was all about being unique, like fingerprints and this kind of thing. And it grew really well. Again, I really enjoyed that business. But a listed company approached us to buy. I was having some challenges with my business partner at that time, in that he was much older than I was. And we'd started that business when I was much younger. He had sort of fronted the initial cash, and I put in the sort of sweat equity, if you like, which was fine. But sort of 5-6 years on, I felt like he was still doing absolutely nothing, but he was taking half the money and I was working myself to death. So we were sort of struggling with that, trying to work through it. And then this company popped out of nowhere and offered to buy us. And we both kind of thought, well, you know what? Why not? And we got a really good deal in terms of multiple. Going through a sale process is not fun. I learned a lot. I was actually on a podcast yesterday talking about that. But at the end of the day, we sort of back-ended and gambled a little bit by putting most of our, I guess, payment on the sale on performance on the last few years. And unfortunately, the GFC hit and sort of wiped that out. So even though we definitely made money on it, we didn't make anywhere near where we were supposed to make, which was very disappointing. And I really found that quite hard. I think because it's the first thing I'd done that I'd really, in my view, failed at. It wasn't a failure looking back on it now. We built a business, we sold it, we made money out of it. But because it wasn't what I expected, which was retirement at the age of 30 or whatever it was, which I would have hated, I did at the time, it really hit me quite hard. I felt like I'd failed. So that was pretty brutal time in my life. I didn't respond well to that.
It's interesting because I mean, that's what this podcast is about, is fail wisdom. Because obviously, like in my podcast, you could say I fail, and it's all about what do you learn from failures. So even though you are successful, everyone has those failures along the way. And,
absolutely.
It's failure is not a dirty word. It's just part of living. It's part of the experience. It's part of business. We hear lots and lots of success stories, but the reality is, about 1 in 20 startups actually succeed.
Is that all it is? Is that really?
I think that's what I've heard, but a lot of them go on to do the next one and the next one. They keep learning and learning, so it's not really a failure. It's just like you didn't really fail. But tell us a bit more about. You said like that sales process. Tell us about that and what you learned and what you can pass on to other, particularly early stage startup founders that may be approached by a company like that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've had 2 sale processes. And I guess this one was challenging because 1, I was young, impatient. I'm really not a detail person at all. And 2, they were a listed business. So they were slow and listed. They were everything that I'm not. So I think I found that challenged. I was just like, well, it's a great business. Why don't you just buy it? I can get out of here kind of thing. And that wasn't going to happen. And I think they literally went through every line item on the accounts for 5-6 years. And I was like, I can't remember. I think I grew up a lot in understanding that you really need to be on top of your business. One of the greatest things I've learned, and it also came out through the negotiation in this, is that you have professionals to help you. Accountants, lawyers, so forth, right? I mean, sometimes marketing agencies, business, whatever it is, you outsource it. In my view, once I'd outsourced it, I wanted to have nothing to do with it because it was a part of the business I didn't enjoy. You can't be like that. And the deal that we ended up getting through a very, very large law firm that everyone knows was not negotiated particularly well. I won't name the partner or the law firm that did it, but we found out later it was a particularly bad deal. And it's because we didn't take interest. We just said, oh, great, they're going to do it. We don't need to be across it. So I think the biggest thing I've learned is you need to be across everything. You need to have a level of education about everything. You don't need to be the specialist and you don't need to execute it, but you need to understand it and you need to be across the details. And if you don't understand something, you need to make sure you ask and take the responsibility. It's your business, whatever the outcomes are, you're the one that's going to benefit or not benefit. So you need to be across it all, but you need other people to execute it rather than complete outsource and forget. And I've had that happen to me a couple of times, once in this with the law firm and again later in another business with accounting. And it's just it's not good enough. You really do, as a business owner, need to take responsibility for the whole thing. And yes, use people, but it doesn't mean you are not responsible. You are still responsible for it all.
Yeah, I think it's really important. It's really, really good advice, Steve. I could say, let's say comparing, like at the moment, I have a bit of a health challenge. There's nothing serious, but I've been like getting into researching all about that one thing. So I'm like a bit of an expert on that now, enough to know if I see a specialist, is he okay? Like, is what he's recommending actually really good? Because when it comes to your health, you want to make sure of these things. And so same with your business, you've got to know all those different components. Pretty much entrepreneurs, a jack of all trades, master of none, so to speak. But you got to be across everything. And I'm like you, I'm not a numbers guy. I'm a big picture guy. Yeah. I mean, I was fortunate to have a co-founder that was the opposite of me in that respect. So that was fortunate. But you need to be across everything, particularly if you're a sole founder or if your other co-founder is not really across that as well. So And as time goes on, as businesses grow, I guess, you've got to bring in the right people that are the experts in that area, but
You
still
do.
understanding that, like we have developers, and I understand a base level of development, and that helped me to guide those guys and sort of understand, are they doing the right thing or not, So, but we did have a really good team because we had a really good culture. So I also find interesting, you said, look, you felt like you had no experience, so you joined that company to get management training. I think that's really good advice as well for people like younger guys looking at doing a startup. If you can go and work somewhere beforehand, get a lot of experience in the area that you're interested in, then I think that's really valuable instead of just going in with no knowledge. What are your thoughts on that?
Look, I couldn't agree more. I don't think I would have done it if I wasn't on a visa. So there's the irony. I
Mm-hmm.
think if I'd had full work rights, I think I would have just gone bang, and goodness knows what might have happened. I was kind of forced to go and work somewhere where I could have a route to get permanent residency in Australia. And I thought, if I'm going to do that, I'm going to learn something at the same time. But I think, yes, as a young man, you don't really, I would love to say that I made that decision with a conscious, I'm going to upskill and be smart. I was a very, and still am to some degree, sort of impulsive person. So in some respects, the visa situation, thank you, the migration system of Australia helped me. But I do think, I think maybe not jumping in as early as you can, or having it as a side hustle while you go and learn off others is important if you can do it. But at the same time, if you really want to do something differently, sometimes that can be counterproductive. I didn't go to university. I got into university to do marine biology of all things, and that's another story. I chose not to go.
Right.
And I think that was probably for me the right decision. I think university can be, look, it's changed a lot since my day. There's a lot more entrepreneurship kind of studies and courses and content than there ever were. But back then, it was basically teaching you how to be an employee. And I didn't want to be an employee, and that's why I chose not to go. But I think sometimes learning can be good and sometimes it can't. See, it's like anything. You've got to make a decision. If you really are going to disrupt the crap out of some industry, then going and working in that industry can be beneficial in that you can really see how you can disrupt it, or it can be the other way in that it can sort of almost dull what you were going to do. So I don't know. It depends on your personality.
Yeah, that's true. I actually worked for a large organization that always talked about innovation. I was being innovative, but they didn't support it anyway. And it's sort of, it kills your entrepreneurial spirit. I have to admit,
it does. And you can trap yourself. Like you can end up, putting yourself scenario, buying houses, buying things on loans, where then becoming an entrepreneur becomes a little harder. And then it's an excuse not to do it. And then you can end up, wasting years and going, now I really want it. There's a whole bunch of things. I think it's really such an individual choice, but there's certainly nothing wrong with doing it. I'm not saying that at all. I mean, for me, it was great. So that was something that I still don't feel I'm a great people manager. I know there's a big difference between leadership and management. I find the management side of it quite difficult because, again, it's so detail oriented, which is just not my strength. As any of my guys who work with me will tell you. I mean, I'm also massively dyslexic, which they take great amusement to. Doesn't matter how much I use Grammarly. I've got Grammarly on literally everything. If I could get it on my mouth, that would be better. But my posts, as soon as I put something up on LinkedIn, I get text messages from all my guys going, "You've spelled this wrong. You put this wrong." Oh, God, here we go again. But yeah,
maybe it's a good point to get more views and engagement.
Yeah, I don't know. I do sometimes look at emails I send to clients and go, "Oh, that's really bad." And it's terrible because I can stare at. Actually, I'll tell you a story. They did a test for me. Most of the people that work at Nudge, in fact, all but one, have all worked for me previously in one of my two companies, or sometimes both. So I've managed to carry the people with me a long time. And they, about 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, they wrote a paragraph on a Word document. And they said, well, we want you to read it. And we want you to, literally read it, or I think made it on the screen, and tell us where all the spelling mistakes are and where the grammar's wrong. And then we're going to hit the Grammarly button after. So I spent, I don't know, maybe half an hour. It's probably about 20 lines long. It's not long. Going through everything. Anyway, as soon as we hit the Grammarly button, more than 2/3 of it had red line underneath it. You just can't see it. And it's incredibly frustrating when you just can't see it. It's a
Yeah.
bizarre thing, dyslexia. I mean, there's a lot of different types, but it is a bizarre function in your brain. I'm not sure what the benefits are. I'm sure we'll find out. Hopefully, before I go off this world, we'll find out that there's some amazing benefit to being dyslexic.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I interviewed Mark W. Travis. They call him the director's director in Hollywood. And he's dyslexic. And he said humor's a great advantage because he can be on a set and he can see things from all different angles, different points of views. He can look at the script and he can see all the characters. And like you get the Hollywood directors hiring him, bringing him on to actually guide them in the productions. So his dyslexia really works well for him. So, you know, it's, yeah.
I am particular.
So,
There's things I'm particular about. The way things look, particularly our marketing. I'm very particular about certain things in our websites, and I'm a very neat person. And I hate things not being done properly, even though I say I'm not a detail person. When it comes to visual details or more creative details, I'm very specific about those, and some things will really bother me. I can't sit in a room with a pitch that's slightly askew or anything like that either. So there's a whole bunch of different things where I am quite, almost anal, I guess. So, but yeah, it's an interesting condition.
So, apart from the nudge, you have Balance the Grind, and from your website, Balance the Grind is a go-to publication to empower people to live better across 4 key pillars: health and well-being, social impact and sustainability, careers and entrepreneurship, and personal finance and investments, focusing on promoting work-life balance. And in there, you have a section called Celebrity Routines with people like Chris Hemsworth or J-Lo, highlighting their daily routines. Now, I'm interested in Steve's daily routine. How do you maintain physical and mental health?
It's actually in there somewhere, I think. It's probably changed. I actually purchased that business 3.5 years ago, maybe 4 years ago. Prior to that, I had actually been interviewed for that business. So I think I am on there, but my life has changed drastically since then. And, you know, part of Balance the Grind is trying to make people understand that work-life balance changes with your life. You know, my children are now teenagers, they're no longer younger, which has completely changed my routine. So what is my daily routine? Do you want me to literally run you through it? I'm happy to. It's quite consistent now. I did a lot of, I have these sort of outlier things where I go off and do these challenges, which I kind of do. I think everybody who does anything in life has an element of imposter syndrome. And I tend to do these challenges to help me combat that. So last year I did a half Ironman, which was, which is brutal, which is a 2K swim, a 90K bike ride, and then a half marathon that you run. I did it in just about 6 hours. And I had to train for that. I've never done any triathlons or anything like that before. So I do tend to do things like that mess up my routine. But if I'm not doing something like that, and if anyone's watching this and wants to cycle across the Simpson Desert with me next year, by the way, please contact me because that's what I want to do next year. But if I'm not doing one of these crazy things, I'm up about 5:45, 6 o'clock. I have a very simple breakfast. I have a high performance coffee. I'll do a little shout out to them. It's called Before You Speak. It's actually a Brisbane-based company. It's these beautiful coffees that have all sorts of different things in there that are supposed to make you want less coffee but promote health. So I have one of them, and I have a Barocca, and I have a magnesium tablet because I'm getting older. So that's sort of my breakfast. Typically then I will drive my youngest son to school. So he's 13 now. And it's on the way to work, so I'll take him and drive him to school. I'll do some probably work in between all of the getting ready and that. So we would leave at maybe 7:30. So drive him to school, and then I go straight to the gym. It's either a weight session, a swimming session, or a running session, one of those three, and I try and do that 6 days a week. And then I get into work. My work days are completely varied. Tuesdays is all filming, a lot of filming the show, or filming Balance the Grind, or filming direct to camera, or whatever it might be. Monday is my meeting free day, so I have a couple of internal meetings. And then the rest of the week, it just changes like crazy. But I typically head home about 6. Like to get home and see the children before they disappear into their world of homework, and then I shall usually do some work from home. If I haven't made the gym that day because I had early meetings, I will do a run or something. I just try and do something every day to keep myself moving. And then we'll eat usually about 7:30, and then I'll usually typically work till about 10:30. 10:30, I have a hard stop, something I never used to do. I used to often work way into the night. And then I'll go to bed about 11. So I tend to get about 7 hours sleep. There's a lot of other things in there, but that's sort of the basics of it. So I'm trying to keep the consistency of that during the week. Weekends can be all sorts of different things, school sport and, the variety. We live down in Tamarama near Bondi Beach, so I spend a lot of time on the beach in the water. My son does a lot of surfing. I like to do wing foiling and other sports like that. But that's typically, without any craziness happening, that's typically how I go through my week.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, they are long work hours during the week and working at night as well. Yeah.
It's
but
different
you do have
type
the weekend
of work.
off. Yeah.
Yeah, I do, and I might do a little bit Saturday. I do no work Sunday until the end. Sunday night, I get my computer and set up for Monday, but it'll be an hour, just going through things. But I love my work, so it doesn't feel like work. And the stuff I'm doing in the evening is often quite different. We have a UK office, so I'm often talking to them. We're talking to clients in the UK. We have a Singapore office. Time difference doesn't really matter there, but I'm usually researching something or working on a new project. So we're about to launch a merchandising arm of Nudge. We're also launching a few other different new things, and there's also another business that I'm launching with a few friends. So I'll often be doing new projects at night rather than day-to-day work. Day-to-day work I try and do in the day, and my evenings tend to be whatever is in my brain right now about whatever new thing I want to do, which is always too many. I'm doing too many new things, or I'm trying to talk myself out of doing a new thing.
Do you have a planning sort of thing where you say, okay, this is the next week, this is the next 90 days, this is what I'm doing today? Do you plan around that way?
I don't plan to that. It's because recruitment as an industry is very reactive. You're reacting to clients' needs. I plan sales, growth, that kind of thing, but not necessarily that length of time. I've found with business plans, I create a very loose one with the team. We do have a strategy session once a quarter. It's pretty loose, it's pretty changeable because what we do is so reactive, and then the startup world is so reactive, and startups don't plan and scale-ups don't plan a lot. It's, when I've done corporate recruitment, you can sit down with them at the beginning of 12 months and get a pretty good idea of what they're going to do. Startups have no idea. And we work with a lot of VC funds and private equity funds who might come and talk to us about things that we're completely out of the blue. So it's difficult to plan, and I actually prefer it that way. I'm not a person who loves planning.
Yeah. So obviously you've got a bit of a background in sales, and you must do a lot of sales as well. So if I was a early stage startup founder, let's say in the recruitment space or with a SaaS product, and I don't have sales experience, and I don't have a lot of funding, what would you advise me to do?
Great question. So recruitment is always seen as a sales role. And to some degree it is, in that you have to sell a job. You have to sell yourself to a company to get them to use you. Then that company gives you a job. You have to sell that job to people. Once they're interested in the job, you've got to sell that person back to the company. And then you've got to sell everybody to each other to get it all towards the end, right? So that's sales. I think what the other side of recruitment is a lot of business development, which is going out and trying to drum up business. Now, one of the things I wanted to do with Nudge was not do that. I wanted to do a content-driven, and we are a content-driven. We don't really do sales in the traditional sense. We don't do business development and marketing. And I learned a lot of techniques from a lot of people that I know on how to start doing content really simply, without it taking up too much time. And then as it begins to have effect, how to build on that. And what we found is that it's a much more sustainable way of growing. It doesn't cost anything. You can do it at night. You can do it anytime. It doesn't affect your day. And you can start to generate sales through content and creation, which is very
like
different
your
to hiring a
podcast.
salesperson. Like the podcast.
Like your podcast.
Absolutely. Give it a nudge is, Give it a nudge wasn't created to do that. It was created to help us with our jobs, because when you're trying to hire someone for a company no one's heard of, it's not easy, right? You're going to say, can you please leave a perfectly reasonable job you like and come work for this company you've never heard of, which, as you mentioned, has a very high chance of failing. It's not a great sale. So we thought, if we can get these guys in the studio and get them to tell their story, that's going to help hook people into wanting to work for them, and actually completely changed our recruitment process. And our recruitment process is quite different because of that. But so that, publishing, writing, but I think that the easiest thing you can do at the beginning, republish other people's stories that they're publishing on LinkedIn and things like that, the papers, and comment on them, and people will start to interact with you. The key with any content creation is the consistency of it, and that's where most people seem to fall. They start really strong, a bit like going to the gym in January. By February, they're going maybe once a week rather than 3. By March, they don't even know where the gym is. Content creation is the same thing. You've got to be consistent. That's why we have days set aside for it every week, because you can't let it slip. That's the only way it works.
So how often would you post on LinkedIn? What would you recommend?
When you're on your own in that scenario, a couple of times a week. It's not a big deal to get started. I mean, now, we would be posting, I wouldn't even know. I mean, gosh, we would film 5 hours content a week. That's just the filming stuff, the posting and the writing and all the rest of it. We have a content team, so it's become a completely different ballgame. But I think in the beginning, I was probably doing twice a week, and I would typically do it of an evening. At the end of the day, I would have a look through LinkedIn or the papers and see if there's anything that was relevant to what I was doing or the people that I wanted to talk to, and I would repost it and comment on it. And that began to get traction after about 2-3 months. It's not quick, so you almost need to start doing it straight away. Other than that, there are, of course, business development people focused in places like the Philippines that can do this for you. I think that can work for certain industries. It doesn't work for others. Obviously, if you're a consumer product, it's not going to work. I think if you're a B2B product in the SME space, it can work. If you're B2B in enterprise, it's not going to work. So, you've got to look at what your market is and where you're at. We have a part of our business is called Nudge Remote, and we build teams in the places like, not sales teams, but we build teams in places like the Philippines, Malaysia, India, all over the place. And our teams are typically operational, marketing, IT, and so forth. But some of the sales people out there are great. And I would, if that's a route you want to go down, go out and ask at least 20 other business owners who they use and get some recommendations, because most of them aren't, but there are some very good ones. And that's really, really cost-effective way of doing it as well.
Yeah, no, that's really good advice. Now, look, in the startup space, there aren't really many women leaders or founders. So what do you think are the factors that contribute to the low representation of women in startup leadership roles, and how can the recruitment industry address these challenges effectively?
So it's an interesting question. Look, it's changing a lot. I mean, there are so many female founder events and things. The problem's not so much the founders, it's partly the funding. And I think it's a different problem to enterprise. There's the same problem in enterprise. When I was doing corporate recruitment, they would often want females at a very senior level when they were hiring, and we'd struggle to go find them because they didn't exist. And the reason they didn't exist is because they haven't traditionally been there, and it takes a while for that to happen. In the startup space, there's more female founders than I think people think. Unfortunately, they struggle to get the funding. And I've had some of our clients ask me to come and visit VCs with them so that there's a man with them, which is just terrifying that they actually have to think like that. I think, unfortunately, the problem of trying to run a business and raise children, it's not a very PC thing to say, but it's always going to be a problem because men can't have children. There's always going to be that period, and it's very hard to do that both. Being a startup founder is incredibly all-encompassing, and you're either going to do it before or you're going to do it after. You need to have a very supportive husband if you want to do that, to be able to take some of that burden, because unfortunately, the way the world is, whether it's right or wrong, is women still do the bulk of the housework and they still do the bulk of the child rearing. Now, I don't necessarily think that's right, but it does seem to be the actual reality. So unless you've got someone who can help you do that, it's very difficult for you to be able to do both of those things. Having said that, I personally think some of the best startups we deal with have female founders. I think they're far more organized and far more attuned to being startup founders than men. Personally, I do actually think that. I just don't think the opportunity is there. I think our society makes it very difficult. But hopefully this funding thing is being addressed at the moment. It's still a big topic. It's
4%. 4%.
I know.
4% of the funding.
I don't know if any of you out there who watch this have listened or read Overnight Success. It's run by a couple of guys who I met a few years ago. It's a really cool newsletter focused on the startup. They have at the bottom, the startup's ecosystem, at the bottom of their newsletter every week, they list who got the funding this week, and it's just terrifying. What we actually also need to do is really get more women into VCs, because there's not enough women in VCs, which is, I think, partly where the problem comes from as well. It's going to take time. I think it's changing. I think the will for it to change is there. I think there's a lot of people who pretend that they're in favor of it, but in their actions, they don't show it. And I think that's unfortunately the case. I really don't know what the answer is. I wish I did. But until the money starts to flow to them, there's always going to be less. That's like you just said, 4% didn't realize was that low. It's terrible. And yet, there's absolutely no reason for it whatsoever. Crazy.
Yeah. You said before that nearly everybody that's working with you now has worked with you previously in other startups or businesses.
Yes.
And except for one. So why are they following you? Why are they still working with you? You must, I'm guessing, have a pretty good culture there. So how do you look after your people? And what advice do you give to startups, around their culture and, how to look after its staff and people that are working for you?
Oh, that's a difficult question to answer. Why are they still here? They've got nowhere else to go. Maybe they go, oh, you've worked with Steve, we can't possibly employ you. I don't know. Look, I think I'm a pretty high energy person, and I like to enjoy my time when I'm working. I hope that has something to do with it. It's not. There are times when it needs to be all business, but I think there are also times when it doesn't. I'm not a great manager, as I've said, so it can't possibly be that. I think I allow people a lot of space to do their own things and go their own way. And where I used to be really bad was being too controlling. I think I've overcome that. I was very conscious of that. Most recruiters are control freaks. Most founders are control freaks. So I was really in a bad demographic from the start there. When you're a recruiter and you're selling the most unreliable product in the world, i.e. a person who you have no idea what they're going to do, and I could tell you some interesting stories about some of the things that they do.
Yeah, we'll go into that after this.
Where you kind of crave to control everything. Even doing a psychometric test is horrifying for a recruiter because you don't have any control over that. So that you naturally become a control freak in that. And then obviously entrepreneurs typically are control freaks as well. So I think I've worked a lot on that. I think we do a lot of cool stuff. So I think that helps.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've never delved into it. I don't know. I'm glad that they are. I'm glad that they're here. I'm glad that they want to continue working with me. And let me be clear, I've had a lot of people working with me who do not want to work with me and are not working with me. So I think if I think about 3 businesses over 19 years, there's not that many of them working with me now. There's a lot more that aren't. So I think I just picked the ones that I got on really well with and worked well with. But I don't think it's necessarily anything magic. In terms of advice for culture, be aware of it, I think, is probably the most important thing. And be aware that it's very difficult to change. So if you do let your culture go the wrong way, and we all do, you need to check yourself pretty quickly. So it's almost like you do a health check. You need to do a culture check probably every 6 months and make sure your culture is where you want it to be. If you want it to be high performance, that's probably the hardest thing to maintain, but there are ways of doing that. If you want it to be very collaborative, that can change as you get larger. I think as businesses grow, it's hard to maintain cultures. You get subcultures and, you can't stop that either. So you can't be too controlling of it. It's like I'd liken it to raising a 3-year-old. You can't tell them what to do because they will not do it. You just need to try and guide them, like almost barriers, and keep the culture in the direction you want to. And if you haven't had a 3-year-old yet, good luck when you do. But yeah, that's probably my best advice. I think you just need to be aware and keep guiding it, but don't try and control it, because that tends to go wrong.
I think that's really good advice. Now, I'm really interested, maybe one of these recruitment stories. What's the worst? What's the worst one you can tell us about?
What's the worst one? Depends how you define worst.
Depends how you define worst, I guess, but something that really stood out, maybe.
I'll give you some context. I was driving my daughter somewhere the other day. It's quite a long drive. And she asked me how many people I'd met, because we often bump into people and they say, "Hey, Stephen, I have no idea who they are." And we worked it out on the average how many people I interviewed over there, how long I've been doing recruitment. And we worked out I'd met, close to nearly 3 million people through interviewing people for jobs, which is astounding and blew my mind, right? Blew my mind. 3 million over the 25-year career in recruitment.
Wow.
Which is nuts, right? You're probably meeting 15 to 20 people a week. It really mounts up. And so there's a lot of scope in there for a lot of craziness. To give you some sort of quick snapshots of some more, because there were some pretty awful ones, but some more entertaining or just a little bizarre. I had I had one guy go in to a panel interview. This was actually in London. And he swore quite a lot. I won't swear on your podcast because I don't know whether people do or don't, so I don't want to stick you in the explicit category. But he walked in and he said it was hot in here, looked at the panel, picked up the chair, which was in the middle of the room, and threw it out the window, smashed the window.
Oh.
Like, who does that, right? I've had people try and crush interviewers' hands, at the end. I had a guy who ended up going to jail through what he did. I won't tell you the story, it's quite a well-known story, but he ended up, we found out he had a mental illness, but he'd actually been working for the New South Wales Police Department before, which is a little bit of irony. He got into this company as a systems administrator before the cloud, and he locked everybody out and then started deleting. This was one of the early online businesses, line by line of code, which ended up that business being sold to a very big business, which is now a very successful business. But and the police got me to call him so they could work out where he lived, and then they swooped in on his house. Like crazy things, like just crazy things. People who've turned up dressed as a woman, but they didn't come to see me dressed as a woman, so there was no warning. I had a guy go to an interview in a wheelchair. He came walking with nothing wrong with him. He's like, just, you kind of just go, I just don't understand. Lots of people not turning up, lots of people doing 2 jobs at once and getting caught. All sorts of, it just goes on and on and on. And I've always said I'll write a book. Yeah, who's got the time? I will, maybe one day. I've always said I would. I did start a long time ago. I think somewhere in my OneCloud, I've got a couple of chapters that I started, but I don't know when I'm going to get to do it.
Interesting. So if you could leave our listeners with one piece of advice based on your startup journey, what would that be?
Oh, I think the biggest piece of advice I would give anyone is to keep going. And I mentioned to you, I regret exiting both of my businesses. We didn't go into the second one, but I was kind of forced into that, unfortunately. I think you don't realize how long it takes to get to that true success. You think it's going to happen a lot quicker. And what happens when you do a startup is you get a lot of really early success. It's a bit like going to the gym, right? And then it plateaus out. And if you just keep going, you do go through these other jumps and plateau. And I think where founders really struggle is when they hit the plateaus and they start doing crazy things. And sometimes it's not about massive changing, or the dreadful word that everyone uses, pivoting. It's about keeping going for a bit longer to get to the next opportunity that's going to take you up. I don't think you need to innovate at every turn. At some part, there are periods during your business journey where you just need to keep going exactly as you are, doing a good job, racking in the money that you need to, or carrying on building the product to a higher level, or adding more features, or whatever it might be. and don't worry too much about the growth for that period of time. Now, if that goes for 5 years, you've obviously got a serious problem. But, sometimes you just need a year of consolidation to hit that next opportunity that's going to take you up to that next level. Don't always try and change everything because you've hit that period. And I think everybody goes through that. I still go through that. My staff remind me this advice, which is part of the reason I'm going to share it to you, because I think all founders naturally just want to have that continuous curve, and it's just not maintainable. It's a good time to start. Yeah, it is. And it's a good time to start looking after yourself. As much as work-life balance is something we should all attain, and with whether it be fitness and diet and all those kinds of things, there will be periods where you have to work crazy hours that are unhealthy, and you probably will eat badly, and you may even drink too much during those periods, or whatever it is that you use. They will come, and you do need them. You can't get a business to where you need to by being this perfect work-life balance. The trick is not doing them forever and understanding when you need to do them and when you don't need to do them, so that you can maintain that consistency. That would be my best advice.
So what would be your definition of success now, and has that changed over the last 20 years?
Oh, totally changed. And I think it continues to change. What's my definition of success now? It's an interesting question, because I've got so many things that I want to do now. I think my definition of success is that I'm enjoying myself, and I'm getting on. We won't talk about my age, but I need to make sure I look after myself. So for me, success is about being able to perform, not at my top level, but at close to my top level consistently. So I think what I used to do is very much this, right? Because that's what you do in early companies. I think now it's about performing, not to say averages here and your top levels here. It's about staying here and still being able to enjoy the fruits of what I'm doing, but continue to innovate and continue to feel that I am pushing myself out of my comfort zone in some way every day, which is partly why I do these, as I mentioned to you, these crazy challenges, right? Because I think you begin to lose belief in yourself all the time. Happens to everybody, right? By doing these challenges that just seem utterly impossible. And physical challenges, I believe, are easier to overcome than mental challenges, because you just have to know what you need to do and you just execute it. Mental challenges, I find them more difficult. But by doing these physical challenges, they help me believe that I can overcome the mental challenges. So I think that's probably success for me.
It's interesting, like a person that is quite successful, like yourself, still needing to do that to overcome some doubts. I mean, I think you're just being really honest, because I think we all go through this, particularly startup founders, on that roller coaster ride. Sometimes
Every
it's
week.
like, and even that whole thing of imposter syndrome, I think everyone gets that every now and then as well. So I appreciate your honesty.
I would get that every week without fail. There is a day every week where I look at myself and I go, should I really be doing this? Like, do I really know what I'm doing? Maybe I should just stop. There is not one week that goes by, apart from when I'm on holiday. Then I'm quite happy. And I do tend to switch off on holiday. But there's not a week that goes by where I don't have a day where I completely doubt absolutely everything. I hate that day, by the way. I hate it.
Yeah. Well, it seems like taking on those physical challenges. I mean, I'm like you. I go to the gym like 2 or 3 times a week and ride on the weekend, which I really enjoy. So tell us about this ride in the Simpson Desert. What's happening with that?
Yeah, well, I'm trying to find weird and wonderful things to do. If anyone's ever wants to sort of start out on doing some things, and they are a founder, by the way, there's a CEO Dare to Cure thing that they do in December, which is where it's a really simple way to start. Last year, I walked across a whole bunch of broken glass. I'm not sure what I'm going to do this year, but it's a day where you just raise money. The Simpson Desert thing came because, that Ironman, the fact that I got through that really actually did surprise me. So trying to find something to top that. Now, I could try and do a full Ironman, but my wife was very clear that if I tried to do that, she would leave me, because the sheer volume of training you have to do, you're just not around, right? When you're running businesses and that, I was barely around for 6 months during the other one. So, okay, well, that's out. So what are we going to do? Well, it's got to be some crazy stuff in Australia. It's pretty extreme country. And I just stumbled across this Simpson Desert challenge. And yeah, you just cycle across it. I mean, it sounds simple, right? It's not simple. It's hot. You have to have a support crew. You camp out at night. It's freezing at night. it just seems like something that would be super cool to do. I imagine being in the desert at night would just be unbelievable, an experience. Actually, this weekend just gone, I got back yesterday. I took my son, 5 dads from school who've all known our kids since year one. We took our 13-year-olds to New Zealand, and we did the Recruitment trek, which is a 3-day trek. You stay out on the mountains. Amazing experience. The views up in the snow, down, swimming in this freezing water that's clearer than anything you've ever dreamt of. That was an amazing experience. Not so much a massive challenge because it's a hike, but that, when we booked that in September, that was just after I'd done my Ironman. I wanted to find something that was extreme, and I thought, well, we'll go from snow. Why don't we go to desert? There's a lot of desert here. So, and I just searched online and found it. It's been going for years. It doesn't look easy. I want someone to do it with me. Haven't found anyone yet. So I've had a couple say they'll do it.
Too far, too hot for me, unfortunately.
I think it's 5 days. Yeah, and you go across the sand dunes. There is an e-bike version, but I feel that I would just get so much grief if I did the e-bike version. But we'll keep your eyes on my LinkedIn profile or the Give It a Nudge Insta, and you'll see updates on how that's going.
Okay. Well, dude, sounds like we'll be very interested. Yeah, I'd like to hear about it when you do it. All right. Well, look, really appreciate your time today, Steve, and some really good advice for startup founders and entrepreneurs like yourself. And maybe we can chat again in the future and get some updates and see how you went on your ride. Hopefully, you'll make it all the way.
Yeah, me too. Well, that's why you have a support vehicle. And next time I might pick a more bright setting. I'm just looking at my picture now. It's quite moody and dark in here, but it's very comfortable. This couch, by the way, very comfortable.
Looks like that. Good lighting. Yeah, awesome. All right, thanks so much, Steve.
Pleasure.